Joel Friedland from BritProperties.com, and we're going to be talking about real estate. We'll have a lot of fun. Joel has a 42-year track record in industrial real estate, and he co-founded Epic Savage Realty Partners in 1991, where he oversaw hiring and mentoring 60 industrial real estate professionals, many of whom became his partners. And over the course of his travels and adventures, Joel has secured over 2,000 industrial property leases and sales, totaling over $2 billion in brokerage volume and $250 million in acquisitions. So we're going to have this discussion about real estate, marketing, many things in between. So Joel, I have to admit, I have no idea what some of those things are that I just said, but I hope that's okay. Or maybe it doesn't matter, or you can explain it.
Sure. Industrial real estate is what I specialize in. Industrial means warehouses and manufacturing buildings. Companies make stuff in manufacturing buildings, and I say it this way: every industrial building is a box. It's just a box that when you drive by on the highway, you see this like these giant Amazon buildings. That's called a big box. There's lots of truck docks, offices on the end, and very high ceilings, and you see they're made out of those concrete panels. That's industrial real estate. Those are the big ones. And then there's little ones. If you go to almost any industrial park in any town in the United States, they have an industrial drive or a street where they have warehouse buildings. And some of them are kind of small. Some of them are 10,000 square feet or 20,000 square feet. The small ones are equivalent to a very big house with high ceilings and loading docks so that truck drivers can pull up, back up to a building, and they can unload pallets of different products. Some really fun facts. Industrial buildings are homes to some strange companies. Do you know that restaurants generally rent their knives? They don't own them for the kitchen. Kitchen knives are rented. Here's why. If you're chopping all the time in the kitchen, the knives go dull. So every couple of weeks, if you needed sharp knives, you'd have to go buy new sharp knives or bring them to a sharpener. There's a company called Cozini that's in a 30,000 square foot industrial building where 60 people work in the warehouse sharpening knives on knife sharpener machines. And then once they're sharp, they get brought by a little van to the restaurant where they get rented. And then the restaurant gives the driver the old dull knives to take back to sharpen back in the shop. Weird, yeah? How about this?
Yeah, Netflix for knives.
Okay, and I know you got a young child, right? You have one?
I have one, an almost 4-year-old.
Okay, so have you ever been to a children's museum?
Yes, once.
Okay. One of our tenants in one of our industrial buildings occupies 24,000 square feet, and it's a shop where they make exhibits for children's museums all around the world. So when you walk in and they've got this like fake little grocery store, or they've got like a fake tree that kids can climb around on, that's made in one of our buildings. So that's what I do. I look to buy buildings like that. And then I put together a group of 30, 40, or 50 investors who each put in $25, $50, or $100,000 each. And I put all that together, and then we own the building forever, and we keep the tenants for as long as they'll stay. That's my business.
Fun.
Yeah.
And it's a really fun business to hear about because a few things like when you think about real estate, there's kind of like the obvious, right? There's like, oh, rent a home, rent an apartment. And then you hear more about the commercial real estate and the self-storage and things like that. But then with the industrial real estate, what's the reason for going at it this way? Is it one of these like less risk, less competition? It's kind of more like less sexy on the outside, so that way you have kind of more of the space to yourself. Like, what's the reason of doing it this way on like what it seems like a larger scale and longer time period versus like the traditional when you hear about real estate and like renting a house, things like that.
Yeah, it's much easier to have a single tenant than to have 100 tenants in a multi-family facility. So I went to this conference in Salt Lake City 2 weeks ago, and there were about 1,000 people there, and 950 of them were in the multifamily investment business. Everybody's seen an apartment complex, but most people don't know what industrial is because it's behind other things. It's behind the retail, so it's behind Costco, it's behind the mall, it's next to a cemetery. Industrial parks go places where people don't want to live. And there are these big buildings that cost $3 million, $4 million. So I can go out and raise $4 million from 40 people, 100,000 each, and buy one of these buildings and lease it out and make a return. Everybody in my group wants to make a yield, which is an annual cash flow return where they get money every quarter, every calendar quarter, and they want to make 2% a quarter or 8% a year. So our returns are higher. It's easier to find a big building and put a lot of money to work all at once. And it's fun because we've got a variety of tenants who do all kinds of things. Really, it's a fun business, and it's so different. And many people are in retail, office, residential, self-storage. There's so few people in industrial that I only really compete with 5 or 6 people in my entire Chicago market where I specialize, as opposed to multifamily residential where there may be 1,000 of them. So it's really nichey.
I love it. And for some reason my imagination keeps going back to Sim City where you'd make like the green, the R tiles for the residential and like the blue, the C, the commercial, and you make the I like the yellow, the industrial, and you definitely would put the industrial like way away from the residential, that part of town that you're mentioning where like there's a lot of concrete, there's winding roads, it's way out there. You probably didn't even know that part of your town existed, but then there's all these things that are being built, created, shipped, manufactured that you wouldn't even know, like the knife rental sort of company. And so this is great that you have way less competition. You kind of get these groups of investors. You go and do this, and so you and I both know that a lot of the draw for the headache, so to speak, right, for the multifamily or the commercial is because people are afraid of having all their eggs in one basket, right? If you have the one tenant and they quit, then you have this big hunkin' building that you can't rent out. And so what do you say to that when you have like this huge space, this huge building, you're talking about, tens of thousands of square feet, there's that worry, right? Of like, well, what if I have this tenant that's there for a while and it's great and they leave, or I can't get a tenant to move in? Like, how do you deal with that objection?
Well, it's a great objection, and it's true that vacancy is the biggest risk. And the way that at my age, I'm going to be 65 next week, and I'm at the age where I don't want to take a lot of risk. And my investors are wealthy people who don't want to lose their money. Warren Buffett's famous statement is rule number one, never lose money. Rule number two, go back to rule number one. So, I love that. And I feel the same way. Let's not lose any money. So, the way that we protect ourselves is we do our deals all cash, no mortgages. So, there's no bank. So, if a building goes vacant, there's no bank breathing down our neck. I don't know if you're seeing it in the news, but it's all over the place that commercial real estate's got problems, especially office buildings, because during COVID, people figured out they could meet by Zoom and stay home and work on their phone at home instead of going to the office. So office buildings are suffering right now. Industrial is the opposite. During the period during COVID, people started ordering products online because they were home, including food. One of our tenants it's a silly company. It's a business model that I'm not sure that they're going to make any money. They deliver groceries. It's called Instacart. It just became really big because people were ordering food online, stuff like that. And we have the U.S. Postal Service. They have a warehouse and delivery service in one of our buildings. Industrial has been great. So one of the reasons that it's less risky is because there's a huge amount of demand. Whereas if you owned a big office building, you could sit vacant for 5 years now and nobody might move there. But with the all cash, no mortgage, it's extremely safe because if the building goes vacant, we don't have to answer to anybody. It's great.
And it sounds great. Less risk and less people to answer to. And so, as far as making this whole thing work, like we mentioned before we started recording, that we were going to talk about some kind of marketing topic. So my mind is completely stumped and boggled at like, okay, you have this kind of this building like outside of town, and like some company needs it, right? The Instacart or U.S. Postal Service or someone needs it. But how the heck do you market and advertise that? How do you get attention to this building that's exactly what some company needs, but how do they even find out about it? How do you advertise this?
Well, there's 5 ways we advertise it. Number one, there are industrial real estate brokers in every town. An industrial real estate broker is like a home broker, but they work with companies looking for buildings like these. And they work with owners of buildings like these as opposed to homes. So they're called industrial real estate brokers. And we belong to an organization called the Society of Industrial and Office Realtors, which has 3,000 members around the world. And we all know who the tenants are, and we know each other, and we bring deals to each other. The second way is LoopNet and CoStar, which are online advertising sites for commercial and industrial real estate. So we list on that. There's no multiple listing service like they have for homes. The third way, which is really old school, is door-to-door canvassing. And the fourth way is telephone canvassing. And the fifth way is just advertising either online or through direct mail. So we are intense marketers because a vacancy on a 50,000 square foot building is about 30,000 a month of rent not coming in. So I'll spend whatever I have to spend to lease it up. If I have to spend 10, 15 grand to find a tenant, no big deal. I've tried everything. And you know what's even harder than finding tenants is finding buildings to buy as investments, because there aren't that many industrial buildings for sale because companies hardly ever move. On average, a manufacturer moves every 20 years. So they're not moving out. So how do you find a building? So I have to find families that own buildings that are in business that want to sell the building and then lease it back from us. Or if they move to a bigger building and their building goes vacant, I have to find those buildings before anybody else and buy them. So I am marketing my head off to sellers, tenants, and to bring the money in to invest to investors. So I am like a marketing maniac because I have to find all of those things and put them all together. Find the building, find the investors, find the tenant. So I've sent millions of emails, and I've tried every subject line. I've tried every cutesy thing you can say. I've also been on 100 podcasts, like we're doing now. And sometimes deals come from that, and sometimes investors come from that. They see it and they say, "Whoa, you invest? I can invest 50,000 with you in a deal where there's no mortgage, and you've got a tenant that manufactures stuff and stays for 20 years?" And the answer is, if I'm lucky enough to find a building to buy, yeah. They're really hard to
Funny.
find. So I am a
And
marketing
that's
fiend, man. I that's why I love watching and listening to your podcast, because you learn a lot about marketing. How you market really determines how successful you are in our business.
That's a great insight. That even in, again, I don't know what else to call it, but I keep thinking of it as like a boring, safe business, but it's exciting when you know where to look at, when you get interested about these businesses. But I mean, maybe it's not boring, but it's not like a breakneck, Miami Beach real estate Airbnb. It's like, it's kind of more under the radar, but still you have to do this kind of full-time nonstop marketing. And there's some really good insights here, right? Like, it's great that you're in this position where the shortage is on the properties, not the tenants, right? Because it's like if there was like tons of properties, no tenants, that's like how, like you're saying, a lot of the commercial real estate can be during economic times like these. But so you're in a great position where like you have to jump on some of these properties, like if the company expands and goes to a larger space. And so these are some good insights that, number one, you kind of have these different like layers of your marketing. Like my imagination is picturing like these like concentric circles, right? You have kind of your hot leads and your kind of your email list and your partners and these associations. And then as you get further out, then there's like the door to door, then there's the postcard marketing. You kind of figure out like what are your different levels of attention and who you're marketing to. And then it's also a cool insight that you're like, well, you're not just marketing to just one type of person. There's the investors, there's the tenants, there's the properties you're searching for. And I think I mean, a lot of businesses don't realize this, right? That you're kind of like hitting from like three or four different angles. You're not just saying like, hey, I want this one type of person. You have all these other things in the mix. And so it seems like it's fun and it's exciting because you choose to make it that way. And with real estate, you always hear about like these ups and downs, right? You hear about the 2008 or the all these other different recessions. And so how have you fared with some of these? Like, have there been any kind of crises or like kind of panic moments that you feel like sharing as far as your decades long industrial adventure?
Yeah, I think when people are younger, they take more risk because they're building their fortune or they're trying to. And so they invest in their business and they do a lot of things, they try a lot of things, and whenever you try something as an entrepreneur, there's a risk that you'll lose, and I'd say that probably 4 out of 5 entrepreneurial endeavors lose. So when I was younger, I was very entrepreneurial, and when I was buying buildings as a younger man with partners, I put debt on them. And there have been 4 downturns since I've been in the business since 1981. And those 4 downturns were horrible. And I did have a lot of panic and a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression because of losses. So during those times, we lost money. The one thing that all the losses had in common was that there were mortgages. So by not having mortgages at my stage in the game, and my investors who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, not in their 20s or 30s, they're not getting started. They've already made a lot of money. That's how they can afford to invest with me. And they don't want to lose any. So when I tell them that I'm the only person out of 4,000 people who do what I do in real estate, which is called syndicating, that's bringing in groups of investors, I'm the only one. There's one other one I've heard of who does all cash, no mortgage. And young people and risk takers say, what are you, a moron? How do you make any money without a mortgage? And how do you buy a property without a mortgage? And the answer is have a lot of relationships with people who are like minded, and then raise money from them and be their partner long term. But yes, those downturns were hellish, man. They were terrible. And with debt, when the bank comes calling, I had 7 banks that I owed money to. I owed $70 million and I had personal guarantees in 2008. 70 million. I had 250 investors, and man, when Lehman Brothers went out of business and the economy crashed in one day, I was worried that I was going to lose everybody's money and lose all the buildings. We actually did lose money on some of the buildings, but I worked really hard and persevered and made deals with banks and just kept going. And instead of going bankrupt, we turned it around. But boy, it was awful. So by not having mortgages, I'm hoping to avoid that in the next downturn whenever that comes.
Wonderful. And it's some great lessons here, right? Like the lesson of always be working on your relationships because you can't have enough of those. And that's like a kind of a lost art for many people. And I find myself like having to consciously do that, right? Like we reference this podcast we're doing right now. Like sometimes some days I'm like, should I really like do this podcast? And it's like, yes, because it adds up over time. And even you might be thinking like, oh, well, I go to this one networking event or I talk to this one person on LinkedIn. I'm not really sure if it will pay off. Well, something will pay off, just not the thing that you think and not in the way that you expect. And also there seems to be like self-awareness at least seems to be kind of the buzzword lately, like in the last few months, this whole idea of, well, if you keep making the same mistakes in a different way, and if the same factors keep stressing you out, and you say, hey, in 1987 everything was great except for these couple of things. Well, what are those things that just keep coming back and rearing its ugly head? If it's debt, if it's mortgage, then you're like, well, let me think of a new situation, new business model that has more of the good and less of the bad. So it's just, as an outsider looking in and hearing about your thought process, that's very helpful. But what am I not asking you? Like, there's all kinds of things that you've been asked and shared on podcasts, but what's the hidden question in our conversation? What do you wish that me, Robert Plank, was asking you, Joel Friedland, as far as real estate, entrepreneurism, anything like that? Like, what's the missing question?
Okay, you're going to freak out. You're going to say, I didn't expect this answer. You have to figure out, as an entrepreneur, whether it's real estate or any other business, how good your decisions are, how good your due diligence is, how much you know, and not make stupid impulsive decisions. And guess what stupid impulsive decisions are in business? Gambling. Gambling. People who are serial entrepreneurs sometimes call themselves that, but I sometimes would refer to them as compulsive gamblers, because they take risks without knowing what they're doing, and they keep losing, and they keep trying to figure out, well, why do I keep losing? And the answer is stupid impulsive decisions, because you're a compulsive gambler in business. There are people who trade stocks who shouldn't be, who trade Bitcoin who shouldn't be, who buy real estate who shouldn't be. If you've got great judgment and you know your business and you're very laser focused on one thing and you know more about it than anybody, then you've got an edge, and it's not necessarily gambling. But there is a group called Gamblers Anonymous that has a bunch of people in it who are casino gamblers, or they go to the racetrack, or they bet on sports, or they're stock traders or Bitcoin traders, or they got in trouble being a serial entrepreneur and doing things without having any judgment whatsoever. Just, let's try it. That you see on Shark Tank. We have a tenant that was on Shark Tank, by the way. In year one, he makes protein bars, and he's very successful. He does $12 million in volume, but he's really focused. He knows how to fix his own machines if they break, and he's got 80 employees, and he knows what everybody's job is. So that's running a business without gambling. That's unless he borrows a lot of money and tries to grow real fast, in which case it could become gambling. But that's the question that people don't know to ask because they never thought of it. But it's a common link with people who keep losing over and over again.
That's huge. That there's all these entrepreneurs, business owners out there who are compulsive gamblers, and maybe they haven't caught on to it yet, right? There's that saying that your business is an expression of yourself and your personality, and it's like, well, what led you to use this business to make your money? Was it just boredom? Was it the excitement? Was it the thrill? And what's kind of a little bit scary about even the way you put that is like it's not a clear line, right? When you cross over from calculated risk to compulsive gambling, like it's kind of a tricky situation to navigate. And so it seems like you're saying that it's important for us to really know our business, to always be learning. That way you can use your emotions, but your emotions do not use you, right? You can be well informed and use logic and make sound decisions and have your team and your support system, but you're not just doing random things because you might not even be aware that you're doing it, and it's kind of it's a form of addiction,
It
right?
is
Of
an
just like
addiction. It's an addiction. And
yeah.
people who have that addiction don't admit it to themselves, and they don't admit it to their family or friends. Somehow they just can't figure out that this is what it is. Maybe a therapist has to tell them, or maybe a friend has to tell them, or maybe they have to see this podcast. But people who are in action gambling in business and don't know it, and maybe they're lying to their wife, and they've built up a whole bunch of credit card debt that they're not telling anybody about. They're being chased by creditors. Those people have not admitted it. And Gamblers Anonymous is a 12-step program, just like Alcoholics Anonymous and like Narcotics Anonymous and Overeaters Anonymous. You can compulsively and impulsively make decisions and not realize that that's who you are. Step one is admitting it. That's step one of the 12 steps. And the problem is the people who are in action don't see it in themselves. They don't understand what they're doing, and they can't, as you said earlier, they don't have the self-awareness to even understand who they are and why they keep getting in trouble and why they have to lie to their wife or to their husband about what they're doing because they're ashamed of it. And they don't know why. And when someone finally says, hey, maybe you should look at yourself and figure out why you're being so stupidly impulsive all the time and figure out if you can fix it. And I think that in 2008, I was stupidly impulsive, and so were all my partners, because we had 70 and 80% debt on 50 buildings, and we owed $70 million to banks, with a ton of debt, where if any downturn came or interest rates, like today when interest rates went up, all these guys who are syndicators today, they're in trouble if they had floating rate debt. They were betting that rates wouldn't go up, but they didn't have either a mentor or the experience in the history to know that rates could go from 3% floating to 8%, and they could lose everything. And it's happening to thousands of people out there because they were betting that rates wouldn't go up, or they didn't even understand what they were doing, and they didn't understand how badly the debt could harm them. And they're all in panics. I get calls from people all the time who are my investors that invested with other people who didn't understand how much risk they were taking. And they're saying, what do I do? I'm in this deal. I put 50 grand in. I think I'm going to lose it. And the answer is, you're going to lose it. You went with somebody who didn't understand the risk, or maybe they did and you took the risk. And yes, you can lose. And that's a problem. And that's why we do our deals debt free, because I want to be the anti-gambler, the exact opposite.
Very nice. And you're a podcaster. You know all about finding those viral moments. I think we found a couple here, right? To wake some of these entrepreneurs up. And there's like, if you think you have some kind of illness or ailment, then go and find like a bulleted list of how that expresses itself. And if it seems a little all too familiar, that's okay. You recognized it. It might be time for a better thought process, a better strategy. And speaking to that need to change or the need to be better informed, where do you come in? Like, can you tell us about some next steps here about your company? If someone is interested in some of these ideas you have about industrial real estate and syndicating, like, what is your role in all this, and what are some next step call to actions?
So I am looking to buy more buildings. I make about 20 offers a week. I have a staff of people that actually have what we call it our shopping list of buildings that we like the most. And when we buy these buildings, we need new investors. And when we have too many investors, we need new buildings. So my job is to mentor a bunch of people who work for me, or at least lead them, to find the buildings and find the investors. So I guess I'm a mentor of investors and of people who are building businesses, especially real estate. And people listen to me and they say, wow, I want to invest safely. Maybe I'll try investing with you. And so the next steps really are having a conversation and talking about what's real for them, where they've lost money, where they've made bad decisions, where their mental health was affected by being impulsive. So I love talking to people and building relationships with folks who are interested in better self-awareness. And that's what I love. That is my favorite thing to do.
Very nice. I think it's that Winston Churchill who says failure is the opportunity to try again more intelligently. So it's you have all there's years behind you. You say, hey, like I want to do my investing in my real estate a better way. And how can someone do that? Is BritProperties.com the logical place to go?
Yeah, Brit, BRIT with one T, BritProperties.com. And I like having 2 or 3 new conversations a week with people. It's very fun for me. I have some young people in the office. I usually invite them to be on the Zoom call with the new person, and we figure out how we can help somebody either invest with us or change their life in a better way or have better understanding of the risks they're taking and how to have more of an enriching life, both personally and financially. I love that stuff.
Very nice. And it helps everyone, right? It makes you feel good and you're putting that improvement out into the world. And I like your thought process here of maybe thinking about like what your minimum quota is, right? You're saying, well, I want to have this number of conversations per week or this number of properties per week. That's kind of a helpful tool just to make sure that you're doing enough and that you're being consistent. And these are all kind of good factors to have. It's people skills, which sometimes you have to just make the effort to go ahead and do it, even though you might tell yourself it's too busy or doesn't make sense in the moment. So BRIT properties.com. If you want to find him on LinkedIn, that's Joel Friedland, Friedland. And we've been talking about this exciting world of industrial real estate. Maybe not the most exciting, but it's safer than what you may have tried and is more calculated and based on knowledge and facts. And as people are going to BritProperties.com, Joel, do you have any final parting words of advice? Any final quote, lesson, or soundbite for us?
Yeah, it's all about the long-term relationships. I find that loyalty is number one. Being loyal to each other, to your friends, to your business associates, long-term relationships. I have investors with me, Robert, who have been there since the 1980s. And I'm in my 60s, and some of them are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. One of my investors who's been with me for decades is 96, turning 97. We talk every week. He's a great mentor to me because he's been very successful. And I'm a mentor to him because I know more about industrial real estate than he does.
Nice.
Mm.
Well, that's a good lesson. So we need to build those relationships, get those friends who can go on the journey with us along the way and be thinking about how can I have that loyalty in both directions. And BritProperties.com is the very next step to go as we're thinking about what we can be doing to improve our future and to build that nest egg, grow that business. Industrial real estate, Joel Friedland, BritProperties.com is your guy. And thank you very much, Joel, for a fun conversation. Lots of randomness and insights. I loved it.
Thanks. Ditto. Me too.